general. So we're going to talk about goal writing, specifically how do we design design data collection. When we've written all these fantastic goals, hopefully you've gone to all these great sessions this week, but now the big question becomes, how do we actually design and collect data so that when we get to the end of our annual where we're looking for goal updates, we're not making up our data, right? We have real objective information, and we're not scrambling to pull the kid and do all the assessments on the goals at the last minute, which also doesn't show progress over time, or we might get ourselves in the situation where, oh, the kid didn't make progress, didn't meet goal, and now we're at annual, and we didn't address it along the way. So my goal is to give you some hands-on, easy, accessible ways to collect that data that is so needed. For today's expectations, I am going to try to have us have as much of an interactive presentation as I can. We will be jumping into breakout rooms at one point. We'll also have polls that I'll post throughout the session today. But further than that, if you need to have your cameras off, that's absolutely fine. But please use the chat. Please use your response, your reaction buttons. Just like we would ask kids to be engaged, find a way to be engaged with the session today. In particular, if you have questions, be sure to get those in the chat so that I can answer them as we go along, and so that there can be some conversation along the way. I was thinking about it recently. If we were in a live setting, asking people to talk while I'm talking would be the exact opposite, right? So now we're in this whole new world where indication of engagement is actually you talking with me, over me while I'm talking. So interesting how things change as we evolve. But regardless, I'd love to see the chat just like lit up with conversation and commentary. I have things to say, but learning from each other is just as dynamic and actually shows like more evidence of getting things out of presentations when you're actively engaged. So again, we'll have multiple opportunities as we go through the day. I'm going to start by throwing up a poll and asking you to tell me who you are. I'm hoping we have mostly teachers here, but we'll check in and see. Teachers, administrators, other DIS providers, direct service providers, and or behavior analysts, others, mental health professionals, paraprofessionals, things like that. And while that poll is rolling, I will again remind us all that we have the Padlet accessible, and the handouts for today are on the far right column at the bottom. There is also a column for behavior goal writing materials, which you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen. That was from a previous breakout session that we ran. Those materials are still there and available, but we decided it would be maybe more helpful to focus on a broader perspective of data collection, and again, those materials for behavior are up there and available. So yeah, we have mostly teachers here today. That's wonderful. For those of you who are DIS providers or other, of course, data collection applies to each and every type of goal that we write. And administrators, I hope that you can walk away with some tools maybe to help teachers in collecting their data more effectively, more efficiently, more accurately. All right. So just a reminder, we do have I know you've probably heard about this from all the other breakout sessions you've gone to this week, or hopefully you have, but we are also at the Diagnostic Center hosting an Ask a Specialist Live, which is essentially like office hours, where we have different topics every Wednesday and Thursday for people to sign on and ask us just questions related to a specific content area. If you're interested in that, you can send us an email ahead of time that we are answering questions received via email in priority order. So first, if you don't have time to stay the whole time, but if not, if you just want to pop in, that's totally fine too. I'm going to put the link for that Zoom into the chat as well. It's the same Zoom link every session that we do. So you can keep that, save that, and log in. If you're available from 3 to 4 on any given day, that's a great thing to pop in and do. All right, there's a question about, is it for parents? Absolutely. Anyone who has questions are welcome to come and join, and we will do our best to answer those questions. But yes, especially in the current climate, parents are more than welcome. So the goals for today, kind of three or fourfold. And as we're talking about goal setting in this symposium, I thought we might give ourselves a little bit of a perspective. What do we want to come away with today? So first, we're talking about how do we determine the master criteria for goals when we're writing them. I know there's been a lot of questions around that, and I'll try to provide some guidance there. Second, we will really look at when we write a goal, making sure that we understand what type of data then needs to be collected. And I'm going to give this a pretty straightforward perspective. We're not going to look into all the vast number of super complicated, interesting ways that data can be collected, but rather straightforward, simple ways, again, that we can have this data available to us. And then we'll talk about how do we go from a goal sheet or a data sheet, how do we actually put it all together? How do we make it work in the classroom? How do we collect it all? And some ideas for those different processes. And again, throughout the day, we'll have opportunities after each kind of goal area to stop and ask specific questions. And we will have hopefully an opportunity for breakouts, short breakouts as we go through the day today. So I'm a behavior analyst. And so I just have to say another goal for today is absolutely to come away with a little bit more love for data collection. I think it gets a bad rap. It's complicated or it's overwhelming sometimes, but it really is your best friend, to be super cheesy about it. But it allows us to have objective information, and it makes IEP progress reporting and creating new goals and going to our annuals and triennials less stressful because you have the information there at your fingertips. You can back yourself up. You have the information that shows that the decisions that you're making are data driven, and you have some materials and some, again, some objective information to show families and to show other team members. So while it may be a lot of work on the front end at times, the payoff, I think, is so incredibly worth it when we actually get to those meetings. And I know as a new teacher, I felt like I went into some IEP meetings and was just like, I do not have the right information here to be making this calls, but we're just gonna, my principal used to say, fake it till we make it, which is not what I recommend. But we all know that at least I know that feeling. Am I the only one out there that that feels that way? Looking for reaction buttons here. Thanks, Audrey. Yeah, as a new teacher, at least I bet. Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, totally. Oh, I love all the different reaction buttons. Cool. So yeah, and especially, gosh, in today's day and age, and me and a new teacher. So, and I also know that this is an area that for some unimaginable reason to me is left out of our credentialing preparation programs. Literally have no idea why that might be. But so I also point that out to like let us all recognize that as teachers, as we go into the field, we're not prepared in this area. So that's not your fault. Great, you're here. And now taking the first step to kind of building those skills. But I don't think that the appropriate answer is to be like, oh, well, I didn't really learn that. So anyway, we have to kind of apply a lot of effort in this area to move forward. So that's a little bit of my soapbox. I'll move on. So what's the process for ongoing data collection? I've broken it down into 8 steps, which I promise won't be as overwhelming as it might seem. But we really want to look at, where we've started that SMART goal. And I think that's where a lot of the emphasis and training is on when we're talking about goal writing. Cool, we wrote the SMART goal. Now what? We need to determine that data. We need to create the sheet. That's like a physical step. And then we have to figure out when and how often are we actually going to collect that data? Who's going to collect that data? That requires organization. That requires systems in place in the classroom so that you're set up and ready to go. And then, of course, the action, the implementation, the follow through of actually collecting data across all of our goals that we have. And then, progress monitoring. It's a buzzword. We hear about it a lot, but it's actually a thing, right? It actually serves a purpose in that if we're collecting data regularly, then it's a big, blaring information if kids aren't making progress. And so what we do if kids aren't making progress is not just like, oh, well, he's struggling. Progress monitoring means, oh man, I need to do something different because progress is not being made. And a lot of times we feel and make those decisions based on our subjective feelings, or, how our impression or interpretation of how things are going, or how another teacher reports it, or another paraeducator. So again, that data collection can give us some good objective and, skills in which to make those decisions and adjust in regards to the data collection. So let's dive in here. So we know that we have SMART goals. You guys have, we've talked all about them for SMART goals. How do you write them? What is it SMART? How do we check? How do we make them specific? All of that. Just as a quick question here, how many breakout sessions have you guys gone to this week? Is this your first one? Did you go to a couple? I put 3+ in case you're planning to go to the Great Transition one tomorrow by Barbara. Thanks for responding there. So yeah, my guess is I see that many of you have gone to several. We just keep like hammering this idea of a SMART goal. So that is the first step. Where I want to hone in on for data collection is an area that kind of gets glossed over when we talk about it's that measure piece. And I know that there's a lot of questions around how do we decide what to measure and how much is actual mastery. So I can see here that, wow, a good chunk of you have gone to 2 or 3. That's amazing. We're so excited for that. That everyone is participating and attending all the workshops. So, when I was at the executive functioning breakout yesterday, we had lots of questions about mastery criteria. How do we know? What do we set it at? And Daniel kept saying, well, Tara will talk about it. So here we are. Hopefully I'll be able to address it, right? And again, another area where there's not a lot of concrete information. There's no hard and fast rules when it comes to this. There's best practices in data collection. You can look to research and the body of research within like applied behavior analysis or positive behavior intervention journals. And we see what lots of researchers are using, and that kind of sets the standard for what do we consider to be mastery criteria. So mastery in and of itself kind of alludes to the fact that that means they can do it all the time. That's not really realistic when we think about the fact that we're writing goals for kids with disabilities and kids that have different levels of cognitive deficits across a variety of areas that might impact their ability to be consistent, or to have a good day. Like, we have bad days sometimes. And I think about this in terms of myself too. If I'm setting a goal, or if we set goals in our real lives to eat healthy every day or to work out every day, all the best research out there, or not even research, but the trainers and people who talk about physical goals, don't set yourself up to fail and say you're going to do it 100% of the time. We all need a little bit of that room for error. And that's where the attainable part comes in with a SMART goal. So what is attainable for the specific child that you are writing for? So you're not going to have the same mastery criteria for every student. It's an individualized plan. And this idea of attainability is, given the profile and all the information you have about that student. So if, for example, if you're trying to deal with the behavior that's happening at high rates throughout the day, maybe, so high you can't even count it, or a behavior that's happening every single day, it's probably not appropriate to say the student will never do it again. He'll do it 0 times, right? That's a huge jump to make over a year for most any child, right? And also, it's way better more effective to have a child meet or exceed a goal. You're showing educational benefit, you're documenting that progress, and then you're able to move forward, as opposed to setting mastery criteria too high and then having to say goal not met, even though there was progress. But we have to say goal not met, goal not met. And when we're looking at ed reviews of educational benefit, if cases ever go to mediation, things like that, districts are getting dinged when we're saying like goal not met, goal not met, goal not met. Well, why not? What are you doing to increase success, right? So we want to have mastery of goals as we move through. And it might be that the next year's goal is the same skill, but maybe at a higher mastery criteria, or the same behavior that we're trying to decrease, but to a lower rate. Okay. And also the same idea if you're introducing a completely new skill, a skill that's not in the student's repertoire at all yet. If we're going from baseline of 0, probably complete mastery or fluency of a skill might be a stretch. Now, if you really think that might be the case, then fantastic. But really thinking about that critically and asking some questions of ourselves in those situations. My recommendation from research and from what we see across best practices is to consider somewhere between like 70 and 90% of an indicated amount or a percentage, which we'll talk about for mastery. 70% is on the lower side. I tend to use 70% if it's a student who has a history of demonstrating inconsistency, right? So I know, or a student where attention is highly impacting a skill. So sometimes when I go to, test this skill out, he's just not going to be attending, or it's not a good day. So there might be a lower score, but I don't think that means he doesn't have it or he's not making progress. Now, again, I might want to narratively include that in present levels or in discussion notes, so that we know we still have high expectations for the student, and this is why it's reasonable. Also, to keep in mind, it's okay for us to say no more than X times as our mastery criteria. So student will not engage in aggression more than 2 times per day. That's an okay mastery criteria. You can measure it, it's very discrete, or per hour or per minute. So that's another way. If you're not really sure percentage, or a percentage just doesn't make sense, then think about how you can state a mastery criteria in a way that's going to make sense and work for people. I see work for the team, work for the people collecting the data. I see a question about, would you ever use 50%? There's never a no. So it's always, well, yes, but, or yes, and why would it need to be so low for that student? Are you going from 0, a no skill level, and the student has an intellectual disability, and so we know rate of progress is rather, not a steep progression, but rather slow, then maybe so. But I also wonder too, if we are presenting a skill for a student where they're unsuccessful 50% of the time, I'm going to say, maybe there's something in intervention there that needs to happen. Maybe I need to say, rather than 50% of the time, they'll do it 80% of the time with a gesture prompt, or with a, reminder, or something like that. So we're setting the student up to be successful more consistently by using an appropriate prompt level, but also keeping into consideration independence, and that maybe the next time around we can fade that prompt. So just some things to consider there. I love data collection, but because it's so objective, but I also love it because if you can describe or explain the reason why you're selecting any type of mastery criteria or type of data collection, then great, you're doing something that is individualized, and I really think that makes us kind of use our brain a little bit more. And my goal for today's presentation, I just have to warn you, is not to just give you every material you need to go and repeat it and copy it and make it yours, but rather to teach us how we think about. And I know everyone's like, I know. Yes, I have materials available for you. And if we can engage in a little bit more of that critical thinking around how are we collecting data, what information do I need, you're building your own skill to be able to do and replicate this for more students. So let's look at an example here. If we have a baseline, which of course is where we're kind of using as our data to determine what we think a student can do moving forward. Baseline is that a student can read a 4th grade leveled passage with 55% accuracy. 55% accuracy meaning he's reading 55% of the words accurately, right? So let's look at a couple of options for baseline, for the mastery criteria. And then I would like you to answer my poll and tell me which one do we think would be the most attainable for a student at this baseline. A, Brian will read a 6th grade passage with 90% accuracy. He'll read a 4th grade passage with 100% accuracy, or he'll read a 4th grade passage with 80% accuracy. And I'm going to wait here. So this is another way for us teachers that I have screens off and that's totally fine, but we have a low response rate to the poll. Oh, that's maybe indicating to me, one, that I maybe need to be more interesting and engaged, right? Always looking at teacher feedback there. And two, maybe giving a little bit of wait time to get some more engagement going on. Great. So we have 71% of our audience responding here, and almost everyone is saying C. So based on what I just said, I can absolutely understand that, but none of them are incorrect. And the reason that, again, we have to look at this is I have some questions. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to know? Any more information that is necessary in order to make this determination? Give a moment of wait time here in the chat and see. Any other information that's needed? What grade is he in? It's a great question. What's his comprehension level, current reading level, behavior and attention? Does he need supports to read at 80%? Yeah. Is he an EL student? What's a baseline we know? Is he can read 4th grade passage with 55% accuracy? What supports? What is current percentage on 4th grade? So right now it's at 55% baseline. How many words per minute can he read? How fluent is he? Yeah. So there's almost an endless number of questions that might be asked when we approach a goal like this. I love it. Keep going. I love it. In the baseline, you mentioned with 55% accuracy, should I say how many times out of a number of trials he's performing? Yeah. So another good question too. And we'll talk about that point in a moment in terms of how many trials we're looking at. So we've kind of looked at prosody. Okay, so there's a lot of questions that span. I heard comprehension in there. There's a lot of questions about fluency. How fast do I read? Does it have good prosody? Is he using good intonation? Those type of things. What grade level is he in? Are there any other factors, in terms of his areas of need? Right. So what I would say, or here's some things to consider. What grade is he in? We talked about that. So if he's in 4th grade now, how does that change what might be attainable? Brian's in 4th grade and he's reading a 4th grade passage at 55% accuracy. And yeah, you guys are asking so many questions. Yes, there's the standards aligned to this and all of that. Right now, we're looking just at like the attainability piece of this criteria, right? So I love that you're all thinking big picture, trying to break us down a little bit. So again, the questions are perfect and we're going to get to all of those pieces. And it also lets me know that you're like really thinking about all of those SMART goal components that we talked about. So if Brian is at 4th grade right now and he can read with 55% accuracy, then, it might be appropriate to say that he'll read a 4th grade passage at 80% accuracy. That's showing some progress. We know that 80% probably is going to have an increased ability to comprehend and understand when we kind of get up into that 80-90% accuracy. And then what about if he's in 9th grade? He's a 9th grade student and he's reading a 4th grade passage with 55% accuracy. Are any of these goals attainable for him? I think so. Yeah, we would have to think about it. Maybe reading at 80% accuracy is an attainable goal for him at 4th grade. And then also you're going to think about what's his rate of progress. Last year, did he read at a 1st grade level and he's made all this progress up to 4th grade? Oh, well, then he's really it's clicked for him and we're good to go. I think we can get up to 6th grade. But, if he's been stuck here for years, then I also would wonder, maybe we need to not look at increasing reading accuracy anymore, but give him a text-to-speech option and work on comprehension. If we've been just hammering this accuracy at the same kind of grade level for years and years. So there's so many components to consider, almost endless. So again, to really dig in and think about it a little more. I agree, Michelle. There's a question about you hate baseline that doesn't break down what he's missing. Absolutely. So, what parts, where is he engaging in accuracy? Maybe I need more discrete assessment to look at, what types of patterns is he really struggling with. And maybe we don't worry about reading at a grade level right now. Maybe we focus on increasing those specific reading patterns that are difficult for him. Absolutely. Love it. And then again, I mentioned, what has his progress been over the last year? Is he making slow progress, rapid progress? So things to consider. Again, my goal today is not to just say, do it like this, but to really practice in those critical thinking skills that we get to what an appropriate baseline is. And it's so easy to tear apart other people's work, so easy, which is so good, right? So a lot of the examples that I'm giving you do have missing information, and I do want us to discuss that. So here's another example. Baseline is that Charisse engages in verbal protest, and we would have to define it separately, between 10 and 15 times per hour, maybe over the last week of data collection. So again, I will ask the question. So start throwing your questions in there, but let me know which one is attainable. A being the first one, she will engage in no more than 2 instances of verbal protest per day. B, she will engage in no more than 5 instances of verbal protest per hour, or she'll engage in verbal protest no more than 10 times per day. So we're looking at behavior skills here. We're looking at the fact that it's okay to give a small range. If I collect data every day about how many times she engages in verbal protest, I could average it and say she engages in an average of 12, verbal protests per hour. I like giving a range because it shows me the data set. Like, if the range is between 1 and 15, that's different than if it does seem to be sitting within this 10 or 15 times per hour. So she's doing it a lot every day. 10 times per hour to protest is a high rate, right? So people are saying B, absolutely. And I think that you guys are right on. You're seeing it perfectly here. So when we think about rates and such, again, are we going to talk about it per day, per hour? And since right now we're seeing it at high rates per hour, we would want to stay probably with per hour. And it's, why do we think that's attainable? What are the factors? That's reducing it by half, right? So you have to think about that again. Yeah, exactly, Shelley. It would be cutting it. And I'm guessing half is the next thing there. So are we pretty confident in the behavior intervention that we have? Are we pretty confident that the general education class that the teacher's in is going to be able to follow through with the behavior intervention? I'm opening up a huge can of worms by bringing up that particular topic, right? But it is something to consider when we're talking about, and we don't write a low criteria just because, the staff won't do it. But we want to think about that, and maybe getting to the team and saying, I really think that she can do this. I think we can get it down by half or to 5 times per hour. And most teachers will say that's still very disruptive. I agree, that's still very disruptive. In order to keep heading in the decrease area, if we do these interventions, maybe it'll be even less than that, maybe, whatever it might be. But again, making sure that we're setting attainable criteria, because if I see all the time our decreased behavior goal, mastery criteria are set incredibly low, like that they'll just go away. And most of the time, that's not really what's happening. So as I said before, there's really no hard and fast rules, and that's what makes it hard. Well, Tara, you say this and then you say that. Yeah, it really comes down to our judgment in terms of asking those critical questions and then really thinking about the student that you're dealing with. Your students hopefully better than anyone else. That is, you've been charged with writing the goals and developing the program. So what do you think? If you can justify that what you're setting, then you're golden. You have a solid kind of place to come from. But what I see really, really often is that we just use the same things in every goal. We just kind of roll it over. And that's where we're getting ourselves into trouble, because not every kid is the same. It's harder. definitely, but we want to consider that. Someone asked earlier about, should we show it over a number of trials or over a period of time? And the best practice for that is yes, we do want to show that any goal can happen over some period of time, some period of maintenance, meaning it wasn't a fluke that they were able to do it that one time, but rather that they've got it, they're holding on to it, and they're able to, again, demonstrate it over time. So whether we use across 2 or 3 consecutive weeks, across a month, a period of time, over so many trials, across a set of observations that might occur if it's in another setting, or 80% of opportunities. And we'll talk a little bit about opportunities, but making sure that, again, when we're identifying how long or how many times, that typically we're not able to grab every single instance of every single academic behavior, as executive functioning, social emotional skill. We're superheroes as teacher 100%, but we are not superhuman in that way. So there is we only see what we see. So a percent of opportunities observed, or a percent of the collected trial data, things like that. And Harry's noting that we are the professionals too. Yeah, we are the ones that supposedly, and I believe with our degrees and with our training, we're skilled and knowledgeable and trained in doing this, right? So build your knowledge, but also be confident in when you're engaging a little bit more of these. Again, I think it comes down to critical thinking skills. So do we have any other questions? We'll pause for a second. Any other questions specifically about mastery criteria? Nothing. I've learned that wait time on Zoom feels completely torturous, but people take time to think and to type. So just give it in a second. We will move on, then we'll have another opportunity, but I'm hoping that's a pretty straightforward part of the goal writing. So we've created our SMART goal, and that includes creating attainable mastery criteria. So the next step is, we have this goal written. What data do I collect? So this is the meat of it. The M dictates that measurement in the SMART goal, dictates what type of data we collect. So there are so many diverse ways that data can be collected. There's complex ways that data can be collected. And I think that's where, I know for me as a new teacher, I was completely overwhelmed at the idea of data collection until I got some guidance. And why are you making it so complicated? Like, distill it down to checks and minuses, pluses and sad face, whatever you want to use, but something on paper somewhere that indicates that the student is and is not doing or engaging in the skills that we want them to do. So that's specifically looking at that specific part of the SMART goal and the measurement part. So I decided not to go deeply into specific, because I think that it was talked about in the other breakouts this week, but I do want to encourage us to think about, what skill are you actually describing under the specific measure? Is it something that can be seen and heard? Is it something that can be tracked to when it starts and when it stops, or when it's accurate and when it's not? And if we don't have that, then we need to rethink, what skill are we actually trying to increase? Been doing a lot of reading lately, and when I see so many goals of reading about behavioral based curriculums and things like that, and there's a lot of, it makes so much sense to me now, that why are we writing goals for kids to pay attention, or to be on task, or to silently read, or to do something that I have no idea whether or not they're actually doing? And so that throws a wrench in a lot of things. But how can you track a goal of a child being attentive? Like, Erica's looking at me right now. Sorry, Erica, you were dealing with something. Sorry to call you out. Jeff Brett's looking at me right now, but I have no idea if he's listening to what I'm saying or processing or interested in what I'm saying. All I know is actually that he's making eye contact, right? With a screen at that. So really thinking about what skill do you want when you want someone to attend or to be on task? Why? What skill do you actually want them to be able to show at the end? And so that's the skill that we want to track. Rather, maybe it's starting their work, getting, initiating, actually getting pencil to paper, or actually opening their book, whatever it might be. Or maybe, maybe there's another product, another way that you can see or hear a response. And then we look at the measure part, and that's telling us the type of data that we're going to collect. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. So common mistakes specifically in our measurement criteria is that we create data collection procedures that are impossible or really complicated. So one that I see all the time is in 4 out of 5 trials across 80% of opportunities, or in 80% of the time. Well, that's saying he'll do it 80%, 4 out of 5 is 80% of 80% of the time. That doesn't make any sense. How do you like that? You can calculate that, but it gets real, that's why we don't want to know. What do you actually want to know? That he can do it in 80% of the times that he's given, or that he does 4 out of 5 of the problems that he's given, or 4 out of 5 days of the week. The other one is just a general mistake that we make by just saying of opportunities. Like I mentioned, it's hard to grab every opportunity or each time. So I like to add of observed opportunities or presented opportunities, so that you're really, representing accurately the data that you have. And then if you have a great system, if you're ever called to the table about that, you could say, yeah, well, I collect that data on these days, or at these time periods throughout the day. So just thinking about how to make it measurable. So these are the ways that we're going to do it. We're going to make our measurable criteria either with percent accurate or percent correct, if we're looking at a discrete skill that we can, see written on a piece of paper, or there's a verbal response that has a clear yes or no, or accurate, not accurate response. This works really well for academic goals, a lot of different academic goals. We just have to have that clear skill that's developed. So for example, read 80% of words accurately in a text, or answer 90% of math problems, in a math test, or even given a sample of 10 problems. I know that people are going to ask about writing, and I think writing is the trickiest goal for us to, so many head shakes. Yes. It's hard to operationalize. It's hard to really define. Think about it. That's why we have all these writing rubrics for kids and for us, to try to figure out what's an A, or what's an appropriate paper versus what's not an appropriate paper. So really thinking about when you're talking about writing, are you looking at content, like content development and ability to, tell a story or provide some facts? Or are we looking at like capitalization or grammar or punctuation? And I would do those things separately if you're really targeting. And which one is most important? I would probably go on the content side if we're thinking back to our prioritizing our goals. Maybe I would rather him be able to, come up with the content, and we'll work on capitalization and punctuation on the side. But if he has the content but you can't read it because the grammar is so all over the place, or it's one long sentence, then maybe we focus just on punctuation. And then you have to take a writing sample. This is where it gets tricky. You have to take a writing sample and determine, like, how many opportunities are there for capitalization and how many were correct? How many opportunities were there to use appropriate or correct punctuation? And how many did he correctly or he or she correctly use? So you have to go in and like really, analyze it. And or you give like a standardized, daily oral language sample, and they have to correct the punctuation and capitalization. It's another way to do it. But again, you're looking at accuracy, and give yourself some limits, because writing can get a little unwieldy. So the other piece of it is, or another part is to say percent observed, as I mentioned, or percented opportunities. So this is a great way when you just can't capture every moment, or maybe even a student isn't with you all the time and you're looking at a behavior goal. Percent of opportunities in math class, or percent of opportunities when in PE. We want to make sure that we have, this is something where there's going to be multiple opportunities presented. So if you're looking at like a daily living skill, like a functional skill, like dressing, or maybe using the restroom, if there's not multiple opportunities, then it's hard. If he only does it one time, he either did it right or wrong. So it's 0%, 100%. So maybe that particular skill or a measure isn't as useful. So we want to have a skill that has a lot of opportunities to look at. So examples: will wait to be called on, this is a hard one, for up to 10 seconds after raising his hand in 80% of observed opportunities during math class. So I'm really trying to distill this down, and that would be a trickier one to collect data on. You're not going to ask a math teacher to count to 10 every single time that a student raises their hand. And this is where we start guessing, oh, I did pretty good today, right? So I might have my paraeducator go into the classroom once a week and sit back for 15 minutes and just take data on that. So that's the observed opportunities, is that once a week sample where the paraeducator or I sit and just collect, because then I can time that 10 seconds, and then I have a nice little sample once a week on that goal, maybe once a month, whatever's feasible, but some accurate data along the way to see if it's working, if progress is being made. Another one will match items by color in 70% of trials across 3 days of data collection. Any questions on that one? Like any things that might come up as, I need some more information? Just give it a moment. No, Tara, it seems fine. Is that too specific? That's a good question. Is it too specific? Well, match colored items by color. So that's a good question. It's a very if we're looking at like a task analysis or the progression of matching or sorting by colors is one of the first steps. It's a pretty basic skill, and a lot of kids can master it really quickly. Some kids can't, right? So we have to consider what if it's attainable or not.
Excuse me.
Someone have a question? Diana, are you talking to us? If you are, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought I turned it on.
You're good.
So is that was for the math question?
Oh.
Is that because to me, like if I got that student, the next year or something, it seems like that math was so specific that it's such a specific target behavior. I'm used to writing them a little bit more vague. Is that just because that's really the only area that he needs specific work?
Are you talking about the raising hand goal or a previous one?
Well, the one about, was it raising his hand during math?
Yeah. So that's a good question. We want goals to always be specific. So vague goals are no good. Vague goals are really hard to, one, show progress. Well, actually, it's easier to show progress because it's vague. So there's a lot of ability to kind of demonstrate what's happening. But our hope is that we've gone through this process and really narrowed in on what do we think is the priority for a student. Remember, we're only maybe writing 4 to 6 goals. That doesn't mean that's all we're working on ever, but we're writing 4 to 6 really specific measurable goals that we think are the things that are impacting their education most significantly. So for this student, maybe he's calling out, 10 times an hour, or maybe he is not participating at all, whatever it might be, or can't wait and not waiting when he's not, or maybe he's raising his hand, but he's not called on, and then he flips his desk over, whatever it might be. So man, that's really making it hard for him to be successful in math. Let's target that particular skill. So a lot of descriptive or discrete assessment, like what are the specific skills that we need to collect data on? And maybe waiting for 10 seconds is too short. Like all of those things can change. Maybe you don't put, if the time measurement is just too tricky for the team to collect, maybe he'll wait to be called on in 80% of opportunities. And we don't have any control over, sometimes the teacher makes you wait really long, which is hard, right? Yeah. Okay, another part of our data collection is rate or frequency. So this is really common for behavior goal, decreasing behavior goals or increasing behavior goals. It needs to be used if there's a clear, explicit start and stop to a behavior. Like we can clearly know when it starts and when it ends. So for instance, I don't know when attending starts and ends. I don't know when being on task, those type of kind of vague goals. I don't know when they start and stop. So I can't really use a frequency rate because I can't do it. It's not accurate. And it's based on my subjective judgment of when they're listening. And oftentimes we use rate when we're looking at academic fluency skills. So something like words per minute, or answering so many math facts per minute, or or writing so many words per minute. I know we talked about in our main breakout, like caution is fluency the most important thing to track right now. It's easy to track because you can give a read naturally passage, or we can give a list of sight words and we can figure out how quickly or how a student writes letters or words or numbers. But if they can write it all and they can't understand it, or they can read it all and they can't understand it, maybe we're targeting the wrong skill there. So just things to think about. So in a rate or frequency, examples: decrease instances of calling out to no more than 2 times per hour. So maybe if it's too hard to track, waiting, because waiting is actually a hard skill to describe. So it's the absence of calling out. So maybe instead I'd want to have that he's calling out no more than 2 times per hour. Increase the requests using an AAC device to at least 3 times per hour. Or there's a reading goal to read 100 words per minute. So there's a question here, a comment about sampling. So meaning that we just grab small samples of data when we're making our data collection. And absolutely, I would recommend doing that 100%, as long as you're making sure that your goals are written. Sampling, meaning we're not grabbing our data all the time. We're sampling, specific moments or specific pieces of academic data that we get back. And that's what I would recommend as well. Yeah. It's the best way to do it. Otherwise, there's no way. So let's talk about this a little bit here. What kind of data would be collected? These are our examples from our first breakout, our big breakout set, or our first goal symposium. What kind of data would we use here? We're talking about 1, and the target is to read silently in 80% of designated times for 4 consecutive days. So there's a poll out there. Are we going to use accuracy, percent observed, duration, how long is it happening, frequency, trial by trial, more than one of these? Not sure. We have 4 people responded here. Let's give it a second. Get in there. Let's get some responses. What do we think? All right, we have a mix. Things are moving along. Trick question. Tara, you just told us that silent or things that we can't observe aren't really measurable. So how can we be sure that a student is silently reading? We can't, or can we? We can maybe if we look at an outcome measure, like the fact that he's able to maybe, what would some ideas be? How could we actually measure silent reading? I'd also ask, like, why is this an important skill? Because the teacher wants him to read silently? Why do we want a kid to read silently? Why do we want a kid to read? Is it just to read? To answer some comprehension questions. It really helps me when I step back and think about, like, why is this a problem? Why is this something that we've identified for the student to need to do? Because that's something that the class does. Okay, why? We have kids read to gain information, right? So we don't read things unless we're either interested in them. Reading for fun is lovely, but really, like, in terms of an academic world, we want to gain information from what we're reading. So yeah, I would look at answering WH questions following a period of sustained silent reading. And see if you can answer it. But I also want to highlight there that we're not assessing silent reading, we're assessing comprehension, which might be difficult for a student when they're reading silently. And so you might need to dig into that a little bit, and see if we need to let the student read aloud, if they're not able to get that information silently, or maybe provide a narrative summary of what was read. Can they tell us what they read about? That includes 3 details of the passage that was read. So we're looking at explicit data collection there. So I think the big idea is if you get to a goal and we start to think, what kind of data do I need to collect here? And you don't know, then there's something off about the goal itself. We need to go back and look at that specific criteria. So let's look at this one. Susie is going to verbally blend with 90% accuracy for 3 consecutive weeks based on teacher records, given a novel list of 10 short vowel words. So what type of data do we need to collect here? Do we need to collect, percent observed? Do we need to collect accuracy, frequency, maybe more than one? Get in there, let's see. I see your question. I will get to it. Yeah. So the question, and I think this is a good one to ask, is let's get at least 50% answers on that poll. If you have a student that comes in with a goal that doesn't make sense, and I remember that experience so vividly, then don't just sit and have a bad goal for a year and not target something that needs to be worked on for a student. I know it's more paperwork, and I know it's another step, and I know for some of you might have big caseloads, but if like this goal I have no idea what I'm supposed to be working on with this student, and then you get to the end of the year or the annual and you say, we didn't really know what this goal was working on, but you just let it sit for a year or for 6 months or 3 months. So yeah, if you can do it with an addendum, it doesn't need to be a whole IEP. If the team and the family is okay doing that by mail, sometimes that's okay, just to add and discontinue goals. So it doesn't need to be a whole IEP, but yes, I would recommend rewriting goals and making sure that they're things that you want to work on. That's another reason why we want to be thinking about preparing our students for the next environment that they're going into. So if you're writing goals for kids that are transitioning to another level of schooling, middle school, high school, elementary to middle, please reach out if you can. And I know this is hard, to the teacher that the student might be going to, or have a better idea of what are the skills that are needed to be successful in middle school or in high school, so that we can write, we want to help, everyone wants to help everyone. So if we're all writing better goals, then we all get students with better IEPs that we hopefully don't have to rewrite them all the time. So, sorry, I got some input about providing the polls. Absolutely. So when we're looking at this poll here, and you guys are right, or this goal here, we're looking at accuracy or percent correct. That's exactly right. So if we look at what type of data sheet we want to present there, here's an example. I've created one that's very similar to this, that's on the Padlet, that's blank. But what we see here in a simple data sheet is that I want the date. I want to know how many trials were given. So I'm going to go back for a second. This goal says we're giving a list of 10 short vowel words. So hopefully it's always 10 here, or 20, that's fine too. And then what's our data? So it doesn't, how many right and wrong? Plus is right, minus is incorrect. Then you have your data right there. A student could even take this data for themselves if you're giving them some constructive feedback and they didn't freak out because it was too stressful and anxiety producing to get that feedback. But, oh, that one's right, put a plus, and they keep it, gosh, they keep it themselves, and there it is, ready to go. And then at the end of the week, you can look at it and it looks here, it looks like our total correct is pretty high. So I'm confident that the student is making progress. He's at over 80% across all of these trials. So that's a great indicator that we're doing a good job there. Again, this data sheet in its blank form is on the Padlet for you to use and individualize for a goal that you might have. Okay, so here's the next goal. Similar, or we talked about it last time. This one says that Ellen will complete real life math problems without having frustration, exhibiting frustration behavior in 80% of opportunities, at least 1 week apart, as measured by work samples and observation collection, given 5 word problems with no more than 2 steps and access to strategies. Whew, it's a lot in that goal, right? And this was one that I wrote, so let's tear it apart for the goal symposium. So here's your poll, same options here. What if you had this goal? What type of data are you going to need to collect in order to know if this student can, let's think about it. What do we want him to do? I want him to do I want her to do math problems that, yes, have 1 or 2 steps in them without getting frustrated. And I want her to do it with 80% accuracy. I have a question. Are we saying 80% accuracy on the word problems or 80% of opportunities not being frustrated? I don't know, Tara, you didn't write it well. Great. Like now I know when I go to think about what kind of data, and this is why I really recommend that you engage this process of creating a data sheet while you're writing your goals. I write a goal, I create the data sheet. If you can't create the data sheet, then you have to go back to the goal and see how you can make it more specific. Yes, words matter so strongly. Yeah. And it's nitpicking a little bit, but again, we're really looking at how do we actually make this so we can track it and not end up saying, oh yeah, you just pretty good most of the time. So there's several elements to tracking this specific goal, as we talked about. And I said as well, this helps us point out flaws. So most of you, or some of you, are saying accuracy, the other percent saying percent observed. And then there's also some discussion or some thought about frequency and rate, a trial by trial, more than one. So we're kind of split on this one. If I was going to keep this goal, and if I wanted to really kind of make sure that we're measuring both components, this is one way I could do it. So again, I'm showing you how to go about collecting the data, creating the data form. And I hope you're noticing a theme here that I'm just using a simple chart in any document. Any, in Excel and Word and Google Sheets, whatever it is, simple documents. And then I just have to figure out what goes in the boxes. So for this goal here, okay, so let me think back here. I want to know, did she engage in frustration behavior, right? That's our first component here. She'll do it without being frustrated or without, throwing her paper, yelling, leaving class, and 80% of opportunities. So I'm going to say, I gave her math problems. Did she engage in frustration? Yes or no? Then I can also grab some data as to whether or not she got accuracy on the data, on the math problems, so plus and minuses. And then I calculated the percent correct of the math problems. So 3 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, and 2 out of 5. So then at the bottom, I have to do a little bit of thinking. How many total opportunities were there? So again, I'm thinking back here. And yeah, Shelley, they can absolutely be 2 separate goals. Absolutely. And so that's the thing. Like when I start to get into how do I figure this out, it gets a little bit more complicated. So I'm thinking, hold on, back up. Let's just track frustration during math. Let's take the whole word problems out of it. Let's just track frustration or behavior during math. or let's just track, accuracy of math problems. But if you wanted to do both, we need to see, how often, what percentage of opportunities did frustration occur? So in 2 out of, there's total of 20 opportunities for each math problem. So she had 55% of total opportunities. So that's a little bit complicated. The math is probably causing the behavior. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe instead of looking at reducing frustration, maybe I just want to look at teaching the skills needed for math problems. And again, these are the great thoughts and discussions that you can have with yourself or with someone else when you actually start to sit down to create the data sheets. So our last example here, Jose is going to compose a complete paragraph of 5 or more sentences within 10 minutes for 3 of 4 days in a week, as measured by work samples. So I know already that part of my data is going to be collecting work samples from the students. So what's my system for that? And maybe we do journal every day. And so it's in his journal and I have the data collection. So let's look at how I would create data collection for this goal. This goal also has a couple of components to it. Let's look back for a second. We'll compose one paragraph with 5 sentences within 10 minutes. So this goal, we're not looking at grammar or punctuation. I suppose we might need to qualify what is a sentence. Does it have all the components to be a complete sentence? Maybe we don't care about that. Is there just like 5 statements made in the writing piece? So I'm going to look per week here because I'm going to go back one more time. So it says 3 of 4 days in a week. So 75% of the time. So pluses and minuses, did he complete it in 10 minutes? Yes or no? And did it include 5 sentences? Yes or no? So I'm just putting, again, pluses and minuses to look at that data. Daniel just put a screen on. Do you have something to say, Daniel? This is Daniel's goal. Okay. So then I can look to the other side and I'm thinking my target is for him to do it in 3 out of 4 times. Stop for a second. I've taken the data. It's been 4 weeks. I'm writing my pluses and minuses, or maybe my paraeducator's entering my pluses and minuses. If I don't ever go back and look at this goal until the end, but this is the type of data we're getting here, what do you notice?
It's unattainable.
It's unattainable. Why is it unattainable?
Looks like a plateau. Look like, I don't know. It's look like they can't do any more than half the time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So people are saying no progress, 10 minutes isn't long enough, not making progress. So yes, it's been a month of collection. And if I don't look at something to let me know that he's not making progress, he's doing it in 50% of the time, and we just keep rolling on and not adjusting, something needs to happen. Either I need to give him more time, right? Or I need to adjust. Maybe he needs a sentence frame to use. Maybe he needs, I just read a really interesting study that showed objectively that when teachers give praise as students walk into the classroom and give a statement about what they need to do, like, oh, good morning, Daniel. I'm really excited to see what you write in your journal today. Those kids increased their work completion and decreased the amount of time they spent off task before getting started in a high school class. So anyway, super interesting little data study there that I read, but so we need to change something. And I also want to point out, I'm always looking at data, and I noticed that maybe Mondays and Tuesdays are hard. The beginning of the week is when, dancing is where we're having a hard time. So again, if I just take a moment to look at some data, one, he's not making progress. 2, something's happening at the beginning of the week. What might I need to do to support him on Mondays and Tuesdays? Is there a specific staff working with him those days? Is PE and music after, so he's really excited? What is it? What is the element, or what's working on the other days of the week, Thursdays and Fridays? So that progress monitoring needs to occur. Okay, so here's a behavior goal. If we look at Layla, and we want her to decrease instances of task refusal, saying no, throwing things, shutting down, sliding down in her chair, putting her jacket on her head. We want to reduce that to no more than 2 events per month over a 3-month period. So I put events here because this goal is going to maybe have a duration to it. It's going to last for a period of time. I wanted to show here that this is an example of what I would just use as an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc. This is just a screenshot. And at the bottom, I have the different kids here. And all it is the date and a tantrum. And I'm going to mark a plus if it happens. Going to mark a plus if it happens. And then I can go back to my goal and say, how many times did it occur per month? If there's any more than 2 pluses per month, then goal not met. If there's 15, then we probably have a problem. The goal maybe was unattainable, or we need to do some intervention. So this is an example, again, of how we can really simply just use a chart in Excel. Any questions about that? We're gonna look at different systems next and how we create data, but any specific questions about measurement here? I feel like I know that we could talk about this all day, and I know that an 1.5-hour presentation to try to get into the explicit nature of all data collection is tricky, but I'm hoping that my recommendation would be if there's one form that you're like, oh, I could use that one, or oh, just do that. Like, forget everything else I say today and just do that one form, because then you're doing a little bit more data collection than you currently are. And maybe, I don't know, I didn't ask, maybe you guys all are data pros and you're taking so much data and this is so, basic, and that would be amazing. That would be amazing if that's the case. Questions there? Checking it out. All right. Let me see if my video works.
Are you ready, Jerry? I'm ready. I want to make sure you're ready. Brother, here it is. Show me the data. Data! Does that make you feel good just to say that? Say it with me one time, Jerry. Show you the data. No, you think you better than that, Jerry. I want you to say it with me, brother. I got Dr. Oz on the other line. I bet he can say it. Yeah. No. Show you the data. No, not show you. Show me the data. Show me the data. Yeah.
So silly.
Show me the data. That's it, brother, but you got to go. Show me the data. I need to feel you, Jerry. Show me the data. Jerry, you better yell. Show me the data. Show me the data.
Okay, silly, right? Funny, hopefully goofy. Yeah, so it's time to get hyped about data. I really want you guys to hopefully feel like this is doable, this is exciting because I have this information and I can use it, and we're ready to go. So we need to actually create the data sheets, and I keep saying it over and over again to keep it simple. Keep it simple, keep it simple. So when you're looking at academic data collection, you're going to create what I would recommend when you write a goal. Right then and there, create the sample, the thing that you're going to use to check progress on that goal. It allows, and then we can go back to that sheet. I would make it, and I went back into my old laptop that was busted and found all of my old student files, and I just had every student, and then I opened it and all of their data sheets for their goals were there. I was so excited to find those. But so that allows us to then, I put them in a binder, and then when it was time to collect that goal, I already created it. I didn't need to find a sample that met the goal or figure it out. It was there and ready to use. And also, if we do that, we can compare progress on the same set over time. So how did he do with those math problems here? And, oh, is he making progress here? And is he making progress here? you'll have it ready to grab and use. So it's a little bit of a harder step while we're creating our IEPs. I get that, but I swear the outcome, and especially if you just do one IEP at a time or one goal at a time, you'll get there. And then eventually you're going to have your own library of resources to use over time. Like, oh, I've worked on, computation problems before, or math problems with using money, and you can use them and individualize them a little bit. Or maybe, I have an attendance tracking sheet for that, or turning in homework sheet for that. And remember that when you're doing this, use numbers that are easy to calculate. So easily divisible numbers by 10, why not, right? That, gosh, make your life easy there. And so here's some, just like, I know it's a little bit basic, but it doesn't need to be complicated. So if I have a computation goal, I'm gonna go to the internet. This is the only time I'll tell you to go find a worksheet. I'm not a worksheet fan, right? But go and find a worksheet that has the two-digit addition problems with carrying, and put that in a file and make sure, or, in a binder for the student. Same thing with division problems. For word problems, maybe I want to write 5 functional word problems related to using money, or multiple step. And maybe we can grab something from our curriculum too, a chapter test or a curriculum resource. That's totally fine as well. Functionally, I might, have a worksheet. Worksheets for functional goals, be really careful. I might actually just want to use the coins themselves to count groupings of coins, or to identify clocks. So again, we're just finding these things, and we're getting them ready to go, so we're ready to track. Just an example for math computation, this is one that I found in my files. This is just 5 word problems that I wrote. Ms. Zombres is making a pie. She needs to buy eggs that cost 25 cents and apples that cost 30 cents and a crust for 50 cents. How much does it cost? No magic or amazing information there, but it was there when I was ready to see, can he do these now? And the other thing that I found was that I just used a website that allowed you to make your own worksheet. This one was called theteachercorner.net. And so there it was. I even made up these problems, and it generated it for me, and I saved it as a file. So where do we have really discrete goals like that? It's a lot easier to get some skills ready to go. So some example goals that would go with those academic skills. Similarly for ELA and writing, again, it seems so basic. Tara, I know that there's high frequency words. Print it out, put it in a file, or put it on your desktop so that you're ready to go for that student. So you have the set of information that you're going to use. What CVC word lists are you using? What 3 or 4 syllable words are you testing? Here's the list that we're going to use. For comprehension, maybe I think ahead and I'm like, okay, I want to grab some passages, and we'll use those when we check. Tara, that's extra work. I know, but I swear, when you have it ready to go, you're more likely to check in regularly on your goals as written, to make sure you're making progress. Spelling, maybe I just create the list itself. If by the end, I want him to be able to spell these words, these 10 target words with long vowel patterns in them. Again, just to show you how basically that I went about this, and I found it really helpful. This is the Word document that I pulled up. I made a list of CVC, CCVC, and CVCC words. Here it is. And it says that given 10 words across 3 separate trials. So I have 3 separate 10, lists of 10 words. And this kid actually has a blending goal and a segmenting goal, because we're really working on basic, beginning learning. I'm going to put that on the same data sheet and maybe switch it up. But look, I can track blending and segmenting, pluses and minuses. There it is, ready to go. When you look, I just want to give a reminder that we didn't go in today really specifically about writing behavior goals and what types of behaviors to write about it. Check out the handout from the behavior symposium last time that really walks through how to create behavior goals. I'm going to show you some data sheets now for it. So these look a little bit more complicated. I have put some of these on the Padlet. They're just graphs, like tables. It looks scarier than it is. But so for these behaviors, what I would do is put the goal at the top, so I know. So we're looking at decreasing tantrum to no more than 1 time per day, and then we wanted it to be less than 3 minutes. So each one of these blocks is a week, and we would just tally when it happened And then when did it start and when did it end? If there was another one that same day, when did it start? When did it end? When did it start? When did it end? Going vertically. So then I had all of my data for the month on that goal on one sheet of paper or on one Excel sheet. This one, I believe I did put in the Padlet. So I know I'm going fast. I'm aware of time, or I'm wanting to get through things, but I think it also reads pretty clearly if you can like get it in there a little bit closer. So this one I wanted to show that was a little bit more complicated, but I think it worked for me once I kind of really thought it through. I wanted to track the decreasing of his disruptive behavior and his use of his replacement behavior goal at the same time. So I'm going to tally each time that he identified that he had an emotional event, and this was a goal that was written by a psychologist. I also was going to tell you if he engaged in disruptive behavior and how many breaks he took. And then how many opportunities did we get? And again, each set is a different week of data. So five per there. And then you calculate it later. You don't have to calculate it all now. What I taught was for my staff to fill these out. The people in my classroom, my paraeducators, a gen ed teacher, if it's on a Google Doc, like just go in and put a plus or a minus if there's a tantrum, or if they use a break. So fast to go through data sheets. Any questions there? Again, I've put a lot of samples up on the Padlet, but I want to really encourage you to get in there and try it and create things, and don't overcomplicate it. So the question about work samples as well, I would keep some work samples, especially if you're looking at like math problems or things that have processes to them. Every IEP should have data samples attached to it that demonstrate that the skills are being attained by students. And a data sheet is great. And then if you have, examples or a sample, that's really great too. You don't need to keep everyone though. The other thing about this is I know some teachers just stuff every like work sample from a kid into this thing. And then we have all of this work stuff, all of the work, but so we have to translate that to data. And if we start with this like plus minuses, yes, no accuracy, then we have the data and we can use some work samples to support that he's doing that. Or, of course, as teachers, we're wanting to do like error analysis and things like that. What's not going well, right? Okay. Time. So I think this is the most exciting part. To me as a teacher, I wanted to do the data. I wanted to collect it. But I needed systems in my classroom to make it happen. I needed to be organized, and I needed to have a plan, and I needed all of my staff to know the plan too. Whether it was general education teachers that I was working with, and definitely the paraeducators and school psychologists and speech and language pathologists that were in my classroom. So when we're talking about data collection, it's not super reasonable to expect that for every kid on your caseload, for every goal that you write, you're going to collect data on all the goals every day. That's crazy. You're hopefully addressing all of the goals, weekly, daily, but really collecting data. So what I would do is I made a schedule. Every Tuesday, I made a block for myself of, taking that, those data and doing some check-in on goals. Or I had different groups in my classroom, like the green group and the blue group or whatever. And so on Wednesday, every other Wednesday, I would do group 1 check-in, group 2 check-in. So I would literally schedule it for myself. When am I going to get in there and check on goals for who and for how many, or maybe the days that I'm going to keep the data samples. And if I wrote that out on Tuesdays, I want their writing samples to go in their binders. Then all the staff knew that it's Tuesday, writing samples go in binders, or math worksheet. We're going to use our goal worksheet goes in binder. Right. Or maybe I do it for the whole class, like on the third Friday of the week, like stop, we're all going to do goal check-ins, especially if you have kids who are aware of that and can kind of give them some feedback. So I would really recommend scheduling it. how many times is it really reasonable to get in there and get that academic data? And this is pretty sparse on this calendar, but thinking about either, is it per kid? Is it the goal area for all the kids? Is it a group? What works best in your classroom? And then one step further, what I would do for goals that needed more regular collection, especially behavior goals, I created a single clipboard, and because every kid had their behavior goals on the same clipboard with tabs. And then I made a schedule for who was collecting that data when in my classroom. So I need data at arrival. Joe, my paraeducator, is going to be in charge of collecting data during arrival for, the student unpacking their backpack. That's your job, is to collect that arrival data. From 10 to 10:30, I want Andrea to collect data on these 3 kids, and we scheduled into our day. And if you're a teacher and you don't have a schedule for your paraeducators in terms of where they are and where their downtime is and what they do with their downtime, I highly recommend that you do that and use that amazing resource. If your downtime, like go pop into math, the math class during first and third period and check to see if all the kids' planners are complete the last 2 minutes of class, because we have a goal on that, and so really kind of planning out who's collecting their data. There were some goals that everyone knew, like we need every time, Jose has a tantrum, we need to mark it down. So we all need to be aware of that. Like that's our high priority behavior right now. It's on the behavior data clipboard. We all need to be sure we get that down. So really identifying those specific goals for, and again, if you have 25 of these, so what are your high priority goals that you really want to make sure that you're getting some data on? This takes time too, but again, in the back end of it, when you have, it works like a machine, I swear. Like it took some time, but we really got rolling in the classroom. Okay. So I'll show you some pictures here of what some of these systems might look like. So my recommendation would be to create a designated place for all your data sheets. I used binders. I taught before, like we really used computers, which is crazy to me. Like we had them, but we didn't do nearly the stuff that we do now. I know that some people use like student files like these, but don't fill it full of stuff you don't need. Fill it full of the data sheets that you're going to use and your work samples for data collection. A Google Sheet would work well, or a desktop file, or an Excel spreadsheet as well. Make sure that all the copies of data live there. I also gave it as a job to one of my staff members to make sure like every month that there were fresh data sheets for every student and that the behavior goal clipboard was updated. Like that was her job, and I knew that it would happen from week to week. Create a system that works for you. So this is an example of a teacher who made a clipboard for every kid that hung on a wall. It was all there, confidential, obviously, but wherever when you were working with the red student, you had the clipboard with you. When you weren't, the clipboard went up on the wall. This is an example of how the clipboard, I literally put these little tabs down the side for all of the behavior goals. So we would grab it, flip to Tara's goals, and I could put a check on it and flip it back, and it was good to go. Make sure you have a place for it to live in the classroom. Everyone knows, and again, assign staff to print new copies to turn it over. Create those systems that can really support you. On an Excel spreadsheet or Google Sheet, you could do the same thing. So if you look down here at the bottom, I just took that data sheet that we looked at, that's a Word document, and sorry, my computer's freezing, and made different tabs at the bottom for every kid. That was been so much easier for me. Now I'm like, I don't need to print and switch and swap, and I just have a tab at the bottom for every kid, and I could click across and there it is, right? And I could share this with gen ed teachers. I could share this with anyone who needs to have access to flip through. I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but some just tiny, like little practical tips for collecting data that maybe isn't on a data sheet. If you have active kids or you're all over the place, you can put masking tape on your leg and track the number of times of behavior happens, or even the start and stop times of behavior. And then you take that masking tape later and you put it on the data sheet. I've seen, people have like piles of paper clips and they just move a paper clip every time a behavior happens. So you can teach or talk and just track the behaviors. And now I have 15 paper clips on the right side, then it happened 15 times. Same thing, I've seen people use like rubber bands or hair ties, and they move them from one wrist to the other every time a behavior behavior happens, or a clicker, a little clicker to every time a student calls out, and then you just know how many times it happened at the end of a session. So just some ideas, or a stopwatch if you're trying to track how long does it take before a student gets started. Just have a stopwatch, start it and stop it, and then just leave it there. You have your data. Just make sure that you get it written down somewhere later. But again, really trying to figure out easy ways in the classroom to make it through these things. We don't have time for breakout. I'm so sorry for that. I thought we would, but I do hope that this is helpful for you, and that the step from here is follow through and really making sure that you can be accountable. I know I talk fast, and this is not a long period of time, and there's a lot of information here, and it can be overwhelming, but some ways to hold yourself accountable to those scheduling and to the things. Set alarms for yourself in your phone or in your Outlook calendar. Today's a data collection day, or whatever it might be. Again, we're talking about goal setting. So set some for yourself too. Include your instructional staffs and involve them in helping data collection. We've talked about that, with a caveat that if you're doing that, be sure that you model for your staff. Be sure that you're really clear that they know what they're doing and they have some guidance in that area, so you're getting accurate data. And if you miss a day, or you forgot or whatever, don't just let it roll and slide. Regroup and plan again and reschedule for yourself. This is so just like working out. If you skip a day or you skip a week, it's so easy to just like slide down that not doing it train. All right, guys. So we talked about progress monitoring earlier. Remember, it's not just a buzzword, but use the data that you've collected for progress monitoring. Schedule time to check in on the progress of goals. That's another thing that needs to be scheduled. If you have binders, if you have a system, it's all in one place. And then you can more readily go through and check and see how kids are doing and make adjustments if needed, especially if you're not there, if things are happening in other classrooms or in other areas. Behavior data, I would recommend like reviewing it monthly at least, and maybe even graphing it, and using students to graph behaviors too. So go write down how many words you got right, or go write down how many sentences you wrote today on your chart, right? Graph it, and then you have that data there. I've hammered in the not waiting until the end quite a bit today. So we're right at time. I do want to encourage you to start small. Don't get overwhelmed, and change is really hard. So just start with your next IEP, start with the next one on your list, and think about, maybe what's the highest priority in terms of safety or in terms of litigious case or whatever it might be, and just start there. As we finish today, let's do a little bit of a baby action plan here. It's anonymous, so I promise you don't have to commit to it, but maybe commit to starting. And so what are you going to do? Are you going to pick a student or an academic goal to start? Are you going to create a data sheet for a high priority goal? Start with a binder or an online form. And if you're totally stressed out, just breathe and like breathe and come back to it. And remember that, this is a hard part of our teaching. It's important and necessary. Please feel free to reach out to me with questions. I have a couple of minutes if anyone wants to stay beyond, but I don't want to keep you further than you can. I swear you can do it. Everything's on the Padlet to kind of digest after today. I do have a link for the evaluation to fill out today. I'll put it in the chat, and if you can fill that out, you'll get a certificate sent to you. Any other questions for me today? Thank you for your attention and time. It's dreary and raining outside here. I hope it's not that way for everyone. Here is the chat, or the link for the evaluation, and again, it should generate for you an automatic certificate.
Chair, will we have access to the data sheets on the Padlet that you did share?
Yes, they are up there. I will add some more. I just wanted to make sure there was no student information on them. So I'll add more that can be used as samples and templates for people to use as you dig in a little bit more.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys. A wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Good job.
Thanks, Daniel.
Bye.